Yeah, thank you, Lucio Spaziante. Thank you to the organizer of this interesting meeting and to the colleagues and the panelists. So our speech is about Venus in semiotic third, the transfigured face, and somehow in the first part body of beauty. On July 17, 2020, the Instagram account of the Uffizi Gallery was literally assaulted due to the publication of an unusual post. It was aimed at promoting the reopening of museum after months of lockdown and presented the portrait of influencer Chiara Ferragni, framed by Botticelli Renaissance, painting the bird of Venus. An explicit comparison between the mythological icon and the contemporary celebrity defined in the captation as a snapshot of our time. A few months later, Vogue Hong Kong portrayed the influencer with the same painting in the background while she posed on a pedestal. This iconic body and face have not just been and celebrated by that of the influencer during the last years. A number of popular and artistical practices as appropriation, remix, always in a mediated form, and also a number of digital application or face apps have accompanied our leisure practices, allowing the digital transfiguration of the user's faces with the semblance of Venus. Of Botticelli Venus, the pose certainly stands out, characterized by a very precise morphological and physiognomic imprinting, the partial reclining of the face and end of the torso, the foundational support of a single leg, the arms, intent on the covering the pubis, the loose hair, the gaze between perdition, neutrality, and concentration, not aimed directly at the observer. Roland Barthes would say in mythology, as our colleagues also show before it's a reference book, a physiognomy which clearly displays all the signs of a specific beautiness. The expression, the haircut, skin, nudity, actually the pose. That same physiognomy of which Avi Warburg speaks, and together with the content would constitute the universally valid forms. We will return in this point in a moment. The celebration of the body and face of the goddess of beauty has actually crossed the field of artistic creation through the post-vanguard aesthetic of 20-21 centuries with a series of resemantization and hybridation. In a very quick digression, we remember the appearance of Venus from other time, prehistoric times like Gravettian culture, for example, with the Venus of Windeldorf first, or Venus the Dolny Vestonis, Venus the Lespuge, the third one up. Making a quantum leap, we see in the same slide Venus de Milo or Venus Pudica. We see two inspiring muses of contemporary works resemantized, a Venus with graffiti, an encaustic painting of my own making, a pop sculpture by La Chapelle. Painting and text, as Barthes would say, are both signs that they both reach the threshold of myth, endowed with the same signification function, that they constitute one just as much as the other a language object, close quote. The Ferragni case is certainly an excellent example of buzz marketing, as the set of operations aimed at increasing the number and volume of conversation about use. But her viral images highlight a first crisis. Her iconic presence takes over everything by synecdoche, forgetting, however, its mereological attributes of openness and completeness. Let's try to do a sort of zoom out. Accentuated by the pandemic isolation, but an early widespread tendency, as we see in the cover of Hoary New Yorker, here is the first critical actualization, the first modus of celebrity crisis. Venus is a long, unlike Botticelli Venus, who needs other acting entities like wind and sea in order to born. In visual terms, there are, for example, in the nucleus of the golden section, on your left, you can see Zephyrus plus Aura, according to Vasari, or Floris, a floral nymph. And on your right, probably a priestess linking to the minor divinity of the changing season. One welcoming Venus with the red cloak, and the others personifying the gentle breeze together with the other entities in the painting propitiate birth. We see also Opere d'Altro artworks recontextualize the first icon Ferragni in Botticelli frame. Indeed, we see some artistic practices that enhance these contextual aspects without forgetting the environment, the territory inhabited by Venus, the very space that welcomes her and makes her present, bringing her to life. We see the arty rib crunch in Los Angeles, Venice on the half shell of 1981 in her first interpretation in B-scale of Botticelli work. On theatrical performance by student and other mural in Venice, or a contextual role accentuated also in extractive of Poliziano poem we can quickly read together. It says, con tal milizia i suoi figli accompagna, Venere bella, madre degli amori, Zefiro il prato di rugiada bagna, spargendolo di mille vaghi odori, ovunque vola veste la campagna di rose, gigli, violette e fiori, l'erba di sua bellezza meraviglia, bianca cilestra, pallida e vermiglia. So underline this context of the naissance of Venus. And this relational force is also accentuated by the transition of this figure through time. As myth and icon, it is subsumed in Abivarbur's terms, pathos formel. In this Mnemosy's Atlas, number 39, we see how Venus and her bird are inserted into an intertextual polyphony in which other Botticelli creations intervene. Certain details, such as Chloris and Zephyrus, the nymph of the allegories of abundance. This table is entitled Amor Anticheggiante. The panel speaks of the theme of love and metamorphosis. The female figure in movement is the intersection between the figure of Venus, an evolution in the antique sense of the Baldini calendar, the figure of Pallas, and that of the nymphus, all this contextualized naissance. Venus as pathos formel, as the archetypal image that returns in different contexts in art history and popular culture. If Venus would be a pathos formel and contemporary Venus as maybe Ferragni or other as Orlin that we see in next presentation, were iconical cultural unit, to quote Umberto Eco, so we would be left wondering what kind of semantic path and semantic pathos they take, transmit, and propose.
Okay, so now it's my turn, and I have the control, I think. Okay. Oh, yes. So, as we saw in the first part of the presentation, the celebration of Venus has crossed all Western visual culture, confronting us with a series of transfiguration that emerge, first of all, as a figurative question, and secondly, from a phenomenon technical production and reproduction. In this sense, the main hypothesis sustained in the second part of our presentation is that, thanks to this aesthetical predominance, the face of Venus as the communicative par excellence of the human and the humanized body, as in the case of the goddess. So the face is always an artifact that does things, echoing, of course, a pragmatist perspective, thanks to which identify a proper agency for this iconic Western face, and furthermore, remembering the meaning of facit, the third singular person of the predicative facere, that means to do. And in addition, we will try to argue that the face of Venus is always a portrait understood as an event, as a facies, as an event in Latin, as something offered as an act, as a factitive. So, okay. Already starting from these first definitions and recovering Jacques Spontané's studies published in 2004 with the title Figure du corps, we can say that in order for a figure, like the figure of the face in our case, to be considered as a body, as a part of the body, it must be constitute that on the one hand, there should be a material structure contained in an involucre, and in the other hand, an energy and a potential for a movement. So this is why, in order for a figure to become a body, it must delineate the interaction between this material structure, and the energies that are acted on this material. So bearing these theses in mind, and these two components of the figure of the body, the material structure and the energy, I repeat, we are presented with the main semiotic problem concerning the enunciative instance. After all, it is thanks to a theory of enunciation that we can ask ourselves about the process of establishing the planes of expression and content. And now we should look at an image and, of course, how doing things with an image, especially when it is an image, such as the face of Venus, which has set up a whole series of position and imposition spanning the centuries up to the present day. So furthermore, and precisely because of the reflection on the ways of seeing in the image, we are confronted with the question of the pragmatic dimension of the face and the reproduced face, of course, and its agency. So let's focus in a particular period of Western visual culture, that of the post-avant-garde of the 2021 century, and the present day, through some remediatized practices offered by digital cultures. Of course, as literature, we both use also the same literature named by Bruno, which is the Remix and Remake book by Spazzante and Dusi, and also the issue of Lexia about virality. So in this iconosphere, the face of Venus is reproduced through a series of remixes derived from two main operations: the focusing, the extraction of the figure of the face, and secondly, the manipulation of the cultural pathos formel of beauty, the one that was already introduced by Silvia. The visual remixes resulting from the extraction and the manipulation can be understood as figurative enactment capable of de-celebrating or re-celebrating the iconic value of the face of Venus as an archetype of women's portraiture. So in the case of the celebration, we can find at least one important example, which is this one that you can see in the presentation, La Réincarnation of the Saint Orlan, a performance by Orlan, the French artist, that inaugurates the carnal art movement, as declared by the same artist, which is a performance that covering a 3 years period from 1990 to 1993. During those years, Orlan underwent 7 different facial surgeries to question the residues of the normative face schema that involved Western art history and therefore Western visual culture. These schemas concern models of acceptability of what is considered as feminine beauty and which have take an icon value. So the cultural facial schemas chosen by Orlan are those represented in the forehead of Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci portrait, the chin of Alessandro Botticelli's Venus from The Birth of Venus, of course, the nose of Diana de Anter from the painting of the School of Fontainebleau, the eyes of François Gérard Psyche from the sculpture Cupid and Psyche, and the mouth of Gustave Moreau Europa from the painting The Abduction of Europa. Thanks to the chirurgical process that let Orlan appropriate the normative visual face schema, she transforms and refigures her face not to wear the mask of Venus, but rather to remove it. So she brings to the surface the multitude of poses that virtually condense the face of femininity, so the imposition of femininity, awakening them from their latency by forcing them to manifest their imposition. Furthermore, to enhance the uniqueness and the representativity of the performance, the operation were staged as media events, and those cameras that witnessed the consecration of the new mixed beauty were presented during the whole period of the chirurgical process. Through the series of the chirurgical operation, the imposition of the aesthetic schemas concerning beauty become present on the face, where the artist, in order to refigure its own identity, becomes a canvas for other faces. With these faces, or maybe better to say with these visages, inherited from the artistic iconography, Orlan reduces her own appearance to the minimum defect. Thanks to the substantial modification, the artist accommodates the otherness and become a visible support of other facial reproductions assembled from the montage dictated by the canon of Western visual culture. So we finally go to the remix that we called the re-celebration. So concerning the re-celebration, we can take in account artificial reproduction of the face of Venus in the context of image processing apps and like, for example, face apps, and in the work of, for example, the programmer Denis Shirayev, who uses a neural network to generate the artificial face of Venus, with a human semblance, of course. In these practices, the face of Venus is re-celebrated as the essential communicative force of the iconic figure of the goddess of beauty. So within the contemporary digital culture of laser, the development of novel techniques for the representation of the face have brought to the circulation of new technologies for face reproduction. In this sense, we can affirm that the introduction of cameras in mobile phone, and of course, the introduction and the reproduction of selfies, but the selfies itself has encouraged the production of the advanced cameras. So, in this regard, even though the communication of facial images changed, the reproduction of the figurative pattern of Western feminine beauty is still considered as important and central. So in this sense, we should not be surprised that both the production of mobile phones application and in the artistic work of programmers, the face of Venus returned with its charge of cetaceanism between the normative and the archetypal. If Orlan subjected a face to 7 operations to get rid of the weight of Venus, mobile services as FaceApp allow for the artificial speculation of that face of beauty. Also, in the case of the artificialization of the iconic face, we can think in terms of a normative semantization and somatization of the beauty. Once the faces of Venus takes on the visual characteristic that make her look more and more like a human being, the iconic force loses weight and become a new material and a new artificial imposition. So, and going to conclusions, We started from the case of Chiara Ferragni, and now concluding with the artificial face of Venus, we try to identify two crises, two separation, as the etymology of the word crisis remembers. The first is that of the separation of Venus from her vital context, and the second is the separation of the face from the potentiality of her body, so from the forces of her body. But still, the face of Venus does things, both in a normative and a non-normative way, because it reproduces the stereotypes of how feminine beauty should appear. So in conclusion, the core question of the body and the face of Venus is that concerning a performative figure capable of decelebrating or re-celebrating those normative expectability of the reproduction of gender identity in Western Western culture. And we finished. Thanks.